Hello, and welcome to another episode of Otaku in Training. It has been a while since we've all gathered together. I'm your host, LB. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, CT.
Evening.
And our Otaku in Training, Bran.
Hey.
And we have a new voice joining us this time. We have our middle ground anime fan, not quite a newbie, not quite a veteran, Brittany. How you doing?
I am well. Hello.
So, alright, before we get started, the subject for today's podcast is Steins Gate, and we've got a lot to cover with this one. This is kind of a packed series. Before we get into our main topic, though, we always like to kind of check in with our new voices. Brittany, I asked this of Bryn and Bama when they joined our show. I'm going to ask the same of you. Brief overview of your history with anime. Kind of when did you get started? What are some of your favorites? Brief overview.
So I was an early 90s infant. So I very much grew up around Toonami, and I watched a ton of... Sorry, I'm... Oh my god. I'm scared.
Okay.
I'm scared, everybody! Okay, so...
Right. Go ahead.
I really vibed with Toonami and watched a lot of DBZ and Sailor Moon when I was just like a toddler. So it was just part of my everyday entertainment growing up. And then I had, kiddo insomnia, so I watched a bunch of Adult Swim, and so that was my other gateway. And so anime has always kind of been there. I would probably say I'm still learning things all the time. But my thing, moreover, is horror. My favorite director is Satoshi Kon. I like watching things that are uncomfy and weird and that you kind of have to pick apart and figure out. But yeah. I think, yeah.
How much have you kept up since those days? Would you have periods where you weren't watching anything at all, or just sort of light background?
Well, it has varied a lot. I consume a lot of different kinds of media, and so anime wasn't necessarily a focus or something I was looking for. Maybe except for preteens, when it was a very big deal. When there would be big releases that I would end up hearing about, I might end up checking them out myself. I grew up with a friend who was very much an otaku, and he exposed me to a bunch of different series when they first came out, like Kobayashi Dragon Maid, Angel Beats. I'm not doing it justice, but that was another. Yeah, but there have been a few series that I wanted to go back and watch solo later on in adulthood, and found that I liked them a lot more than I remembered. Probably just because they make more sense. There's more context now. But I have been keeping up with a lot more series and exploring a lot of different kinds of series in general, particularly since meeting LB. But let's call my level of exposure not patrician, but also I'm not a plebe either. Anime literate, not like hardcore. Not hardcore dedicated. Lifelong person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that works.
That's my backstory at the end.
Cool.
Sounds good, and definitely best to frame everything through ancient Roman terminology.
Of course, yeah.
So, alright, with that out of the way, let's go ahead. Let's start talking about our main topic, Steins Gate. Steins Gate was a 2011 series from Studio White Fox, I want to say. Am I right?
Yes,
Alright,
correct.
White Fox,
Was
based
their
on a visual
third,
novel.
just to interject a little, it was their third series, and the one immediately prior to this was Katana Gatari. So, frankly, for a studio's starting endeavors, that's some hot shit right there.
Yeah, I gotta agree with that. So, seeing as how he is our resident detail expert, we're gonna let CT give us a brief overview. Steins Gate, what is it about in as brief of terms as you can?
I mean, I'm not sure how much you need to know going in, other than it has a visual novel source for it, so it kind of introduces you to the type of storytelling methodology that it adopts throughout. It has complex storylines that are very sci-fi, very immediately into time looping and quasi time travel. It's very anime still, in all of the best and occasionally worst meanings of the word, but it incorporates that into one of the harder kind of sci-fi premises that you're likely to run across. So I don't think the utter core of it needs to be worked out. We start with our main characters meeting each other, but then they start re-meeting each other, and the world starts changing around them, and the devil is kind of in the details for this.
Yeah.
I wanted to flip something over to Bran first because you're the more video game aligned of it, and I was curious whether or not this was something in its visual novel form that ran across your radar back in the day. I forget what kind of VN exposure you have in general.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah. So back in the day, I actually used to write game news stuff. And excuse me, one sec. Did a little bit of choking there. I'm good.
Sure. A little bit, it's fine.
So
Well,
I used to write about video games, and we did cover a fair amount of like JRPG stuff. And so I probably wrote a couple of articles about Steins Gate. It was like, this is kind of interesting, but I never actually got around to playing it. And I did kind of, I was watching it and I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of nonary games. Yeah, okay. Uh-huh. I can even see where like you've got the different branching paths with the conversations and stuff. And so I've been meaning to actually go and play Steins Gate. I've actually got it sitting on my desktop. I just haven't had a chance to jump into it.
Right on.
This was also, for you at least, the first pulling into doing a 2-core since we picked up. We've been doing
Yes.
1-core series, and LB and I had kind of decided on Steins Gate being the 2-core introduction because it's one of the most well-known and things people get excited over, and you're challenging yourself to plot 24 episodes or that many episodes together into detail and into either a solid structure or something that fell apart. When you were going into it, did you have any reservations or thoughts about that in particular, since you at least also knew some of the concept of it?
Actually, it's kind of like the perfect 2-core for me to start off on because I'm a huge sci-fi nerd. Like, my favorite Star Trek episodes are always the time loop episodes. So this was like right up my alley. So this is pretty perfect for going into 2-core. And I was like, Yeah, that halfway point, I was like, let's go. And I probably went through like 10 episodes in one day.
Awesome. I always love
Makes sense.
hearing that.
Yeah.
You
So
want to
I'd like
start
to.
leaning into the episode progression and then pulling around for thoughts. I'm not sure if you have a particular pace you want to approach the series in, LB.
I was actually just about to go ahead. I want to take this in kind of chunks. Basically, so I'm going to turn a question over to both Bran and Brittany. I'm going to start with Bran. So basically, Steins Gate, when I was rewatching this series for the podcast, I remembered how much of a slow burn series this is.
Yeah.
Because it's based on a pretty lengthy visual novel, it takes its time to introduce its story and really start amping things up. It takes a good 6 episodes, I'd say, for all the characters to get introduced, get a basic idea of what their role is in the overall narrative, before things start picking up. So I'm going to start with Bran, and then, like I said, I'll jump over to Brittany. Over those first 6-7 episodes or so, when it was first introducing things, what were your first impressions? Because I know when Brittany and I were watching it, Brittany was having a little harder time getting into it. I'm kind of curious how your first reactions to those first initial setup episodes were.
Uh, I think I was enjoying them. I did recognize that it was a little bit slow, but I think not necessarily knowing exactly where the time loopy stuff was really going to kick up and what the main chunk of the story was going to be, I was kind of along for the ride to like take in all the details, because I was maybe it was just anticipation. I was like, it could happen any minute, like, and then we're just into it, and you got to be ready for that. So I think not knowing necessarily where it started actually made the slow burn more enjoyable. Um, and really, I remember the beginning of it just mostly being that my main problem was uh, Ocarine just kind of being a dick, and I was
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Oh
"Man,
my
like, can
god.
you just back
Ocarine
off
and
just a
Daru.
little?
Yeah,
Yeah,
like tone it down just a little bit.
just a
Jeez.
little." Like,
Jesus.
guys,
Dude.
like, people will tell you not to do a thing, and then you will just do it over and over, and like, that was a little bit much. I was like,
But
okay,
also,
this
yeah.
bit can end now. But other than that, for the most part, I kind of enjoyed the slow burn.
Awesome. Brittany, I'm gonna rephrase my question slightly for you, because like I mentioned a few minutes ago, you
Yeah.
were, from what I could tell when we were watching it together, you were enjoying the series ish, but it took you a while to really get into it. So I'd like for you to kind of think back to those first initial episodes. Did you have a particular episode or a particular moment where where the switch in your head kind of got flicked and you were like, okay, now, things are getting interesting. Now I'm starting to get into it a bit more.
Okay, I think I can explain. Um, so I'm gonna write down a note so that I stay focused because I'm really awful. So when I first started watching Steins Gate, I had basically I didn't know that much about it. I went into it pretty blind, but all I knew is okay, sci-fi, time travel, antics stuff, mind bendy stuff. But it did start out with just kind of a neckbeard nest, and then Mayuri being with them, and I like how when Makise Kurisu shows up, she's like, I'm kind of concerned about your safety, like a little bit. Like these guys are kind of lechers. Like what is going on? Like when she finally came into the show, I was like, okay, honestly, she's asking questions that are pretty valid. Um,
Yeah.
like she kind of lended more credibility to the story and kind of helped it get more focused. Because in the beginning, I was watching for details because I was like, all right, here's the setup. Here's all this information and these people and these conditions, and here are the things they're saying out loud. And then here are the things that, like the furtive glances over his shoulder. What are they hinting at? Where's this going to go? And so I'm just focusing really hard on all the details. But yeah, just listening to the banter of Daru and Okabe it felt irritating. I knew it was going to go somewhere more specific. I knew it was going to get better. It also didn't help that I think I was just like in a bad mood or bad headspace when I first started watching this, so I felt extra impatient. I just felt like, y'all dicks, get to the point. But I bet this is definitely a show that would only appreciate and value the more times you watch it. But I think, yeah, at first I felt frustrated because it didn't seem very focused. But I think it ends up being a strength. It's like the more time I spend around people, the characters, even those who speak at very loud volumes and piss their landlord off every day or every other day. But the progression of the show is interesting because as the lab members come together and the lab forms and they kind of form, like their little group, it felt comfier. Like just over time I accepted, okay, that's just who person is. That's just who person is. And I got to see more parts of characters that, I think Daru's still, he's like, well, my daughter, guess I don't know if, okay. But
I guess.
I think,
sorry, completely.
No, it's okay. I just, but I think that when Kurisu shows up and they actually start talking about what they're collaborating on and what they're working on, and they actually start yielding more results, that started to get increasingly exciting. And I do like that it starts out kind of slow and almost like a lethargic, boring, hot summer, and then it turns into just insanity. And there are other series I've enjoyed that are, I haven't seen Ghost in the Shell in a really long time, but I think it has a similar thing going on. And I know there are a bunch of different Ghost in the Shells, a bunch of different iterations, but the one that had like 2 seasons came out in like 2004, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
some of that standalone complex.
Yes, standalone complex, where it starts really slow, but then like things start chugging as you get more like details and
that seems to be the progress of many a sci-fi thing. Is of course their world building and introducing the elements, and then you gotta wait a bit before everything starts building the the action momentum.
Yeah, and it was kind of fun because I went from starting off like, being like, these people can go get bent. Why should I care about any of them? They're so annoying. To like, oh my god, everyone's so special and precious, and life is precious, and they, oh my god. I was kind of blown away by where the show ended up going. I was not expecting like feels, which is silly because time travel messes with everything. And I was so frustrated watching them just be like, oh, you need a thing? oh, you want to text your mom about eating vegetables because it might work? Let's do it. Let's just freaking do it.
You just want to send a random text message that can change time itself? Sure.
It's
Okay.
it's the zombie thing, right? It's the have you never heard of zombies before? You're like, do you not understand how time shenanigans affect things? Like,
Yeah.
we're going to do this thing. Like,
That was-
should we not consider it?
Yeah, and it was
Nah.
no, whatever.
One
But, yeah.
bouncing off some of the early comments about specifically about Daru and Ho in Kyoma being, gigantically annoying, especially in the beginning. Just for clarification, I'm curious whether or not folks watched the sub or the dub. For me, of course, I did the. I rather assumed from you you'd watched the dub.
Yeah.
But just for me with the sub, I find that Mamoru Miyano is obviously a huge voice actor, but he can get into one of the most aggravating vocal spaces possible, especially when he's just doing over the top insanity, which is every mad scientist thing. So which route did you which path did you take, Bran?
I believe I watched the sub. I watched it a few months ago, so
Yeah.
we'll talk about it. I'm pretty sure I watched the sub.
And Daru kind of has a kind of annoying voice as well.
Yeah.
I'm curious if, LB, with your, watching it at different points over time, do you have a point of comparison as to sub and dub, the way that they're reflected? Are they kind of matching the vocal type, or do you not have? Did you never watch the sub?
Because I've only watched 4 episodes of the sub, and that was back when it was very first released.
Right. So
any other time that I've actually completed the series, I've watched it dubbed.
Okay. More point of curiosity, because especially with Miyano, the way that Okabe gets psychotic, as it were.
Yeah, I get it.
Goes,
and CT, I'm curious,
Yeah.
did you, when you first watched this series, did you watch it weekly when it aired, or when did you first encounter this series?
I did not. I was not. I don't even think that anyone was doing competent simulcasts at the time, because that was 2011.
You would have had to sail the high seas to get this one.
Yeah, no, I was not. I was not keeping up with anything that way. It would take kind of until Sword Art Online broke Crunchyroll into the more mainstream, and then picking up more titles for me to start getting into stuff. So late 2012. So this one I didn't watch weekly. Neither did I watch Madoka Magica weekly. I, collected them a few years down. And this was one where I kept trying to get friends into it as well. So I think I watched the first half of it multiple times, but somehow we never proceeded to the back half of it, which is a weird way to take it.
Yeah.
People I watched with needed a breather at the midpoint, and then never got back to it, and it was a little bit funny. We'll get there.
Bran, you wanted to interject?
Yeah, this is not important at all, but did you say that Sword Art Online is what got Crunchyroll going?
What I mean...
It was one of the first to really help it.
No kidding.
Attack on Titan.
Right. Oh, I actually...
That just blew my mind.
That just brought back a memory. In it would have been 2013, 2014. My family, I wasn't living with them anymore, but I would still visit and stuff. But my family would host foreign exchange students from Japan. And so there were different sets of and it was awesome. They were super fun. And I remember at the time they were so into Attack on Titan, and Sword Art Online, and they were like keeping up with ongoing, and yeah, it was.
Yeah.
But it was before I had heard much about it either. But yeah,
Those two are obvious things that picked up and became very popular for a much more normie kind of crowd and became mimetic. But I think both of them together kind of made it so that Crunchyroll got a lot more subscriptions and attention into legal streaming and managed to flex their muscles to pick up more and more series. So that feels like the momentum point for Crunchyroll in general.
Mind blown.
Yeah. Right.
So so we've talked about the first, few episodes and the ramping up of the series and getting into the main bit. Brittany, I'm gonna turn it over to you first for this next question.
okay.
So during the middle portion, we're getting about to the about halfway mark of the series when the story is really ramping up. Characters are starting to reveal what their backgrounds are. Shining Fingers working for CERN,
Yeah.
and what's her name is actually John Teeter,
Yep. Susan.
things like that. So my question for you is, you have watched a lot of, twisted psychological series over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Did Steins Gate manage to keep surprising you, or at any point did you start to figure out kind of the inner mechanisms and see things coming, or was it keeping you on your toes? How did it succeed in that regard?
This is actually. I would. So I think what happened. Sorry, there are like two things I want to say at the same time. One of them is I am going to give an answer about this, but also it might. I don't know. I don't expect you to have remembered, but I know that throughout the series, as things would happen or they would have like a cliffhanger ending, I would be like, "Oh man, they're gonna do blank. They're totally. Oh my, yeah." So I don't know if you recall any points in time when I made a correct or super incorrect prediction. I was starting to wonder towards the end, which is not a part of your question. When it came down to, okay, it seems like the Time Lords care about life for a life. They are Old Testament, rules. So, it made me. There were things that were not super surprising for like a time travel series. There were beats that I have seen in other stories before, but I liked the way that they were used. So I didn't, and it was still really innovative and interesting. I got super into it once things started picking up, and I did need to take a break from it sometimes because it ended up being super heavy. When everyone's just dying over and over again. Also, this is really dumb to ask now, but spoilers, okay.
Yeah, spoilers are fine.
Okay, I figured.
No, it's fine. Sorry, I should have been clear about that before.
We do. We didn't technically give the audience a spoiler warning, but that's kind of the concept of the thing: is you pick a series and you talk all about it. So
yeah.
Go for it. Sorry. I just felt worried for a second. But trying to get back to what your original question was. Oh yeah, expectations.
Expectations and surprise and
It was really good. It would, have moments of despair, and you'd be like, damn, everything is messed up now. What are they gonna do? Okabe is totally emotionally destroyed. He can't go anymore. And then, it felt paced well. I think the only thing that bothered me was how, all their hubris in the beginning. Like, if they're studying time travel and they're, avid enthusiasts, I understand deciding, I'm going to compromise safety. Forget about it. Let's just try stuff and see what happens, because this is exciting. New territory. But I cannot believe that they just, with reckless abandon, kept changing the past, and we're like, it's fine. And it doesn't take until later, after they've been doing it a minute, and Kurisu's like, so there's this thing called the butterfly effect. And I'm like, that should have, I'm surprised. But
to be fair, there's only one person who understands the extent of the world changes going on, and he has a hard time convincing other people even that it's going on. But you think that would have reined Okabe in just a tad.
Yeah. That was an interesting part of the series as well, is that kind of just isolation, that singular experience that people can't share with you. But it made it a good reveal that there was kind of a method for people recovering memories from different timelines that they had left.
World lines.
Excuse me.
Yeah,
I keep.
We have to use their terminology, or we'll
no, you're totally right. I couldn't remember the word. The world lines.
So, Bran, I want to go ahead. I want to interject and toss it over to you as well, because you mentioned earlier that you are an experienced sci-fi fan. You like time travel series. So I'm posing the same question to you. Did you find that this series kept you on your toes, or were the story beats familiar enough that you kind of saw things coming?
Sort of yes and no. As Brittany was saying, there's a lot of tropey activities happening that were not particularly surprising on their own, but there were elements of it that kind of were surprising. One of them is actually, things kind of just start turning really bad a lot sooner than I thought, because some of the stuff feels like it would be closer to a climax of the story, 10 episodes further in than where it starts. And so, it burns in a different way than I feel like other time travel-y type things work. The other thing that I thought was really interesting was how interested it was in they're not really side stories, but how interested they are in the effects of these changes on people. It's not just concerned with its main plot of well, how did this affect us breaking this time loop and getting to the, I can't remember, the primary world line, or the 1%, breaking the 1% barrier, or whatever it was. It's not just interested in that. It's very interested in what it means for Ferris to get her dad back, and how that affects her, and all sorts of stuff like that, where it's not just the main plot, which is very often what happens, is everything is just a side thing to a main plot. It actually gave a crap about the side stories. They took a central focus when that thing was happening, in a way that isn't, I don't feel, particularly common. Which, I mean, kind of makes sense too, right? Because the structure of the show, which, spoilers, is that essentially all of the shit that they end up doing, they kind of walk back. They have to undo all of it. And so
They have to clean up their messes.
So yeah, that's the emotional punches. You are along for the ride of like fixing all of these things, but then you have to unfix them to fix stuff.
Which is almost like more painful than the tough situation to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to fix them in a way that doesn't cause a causality issue with it. So, and it has to appear from, the earlier scenes. Once they get back, everything has to flow from the entire setup, which, of course, is nifty in general.
And again, I think you're right, Brittany, that it kind of feeds into that particular experience that he's having of like, what does it mean to have the ability to remember all of this and to effectively, even though he's not time traveling, have something like the experience of time traveling, and how incredibly frustrating it must be to have all of that power and have no power.
Yes. Yeah, and I think it kind of makes it more just the way that the world is set up and the characters behave in their world is it feels natural and believable. Probably because we watch it over and over and over and over again, so it becomes more familiar. But like, I think it makes it more impressive and telling that he just happens to be surrounded by all the right people who actually, under some circumstances, will actually believe him.
Right.
And sorry for saying actually, like three or twice or whatever. Okay. And yeah, my train of thought is gone. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it is, I think, having, as you watch it, it does, I don't want to say redeem the kind of crap from the beginning, but it is, because it does go too far in the beginning with a bunch of that stuff, but it is trying to establish. So in the original series of Star Trek, there's the Mirrorverse that they go into and whatever, they get stuck. But the kicker of it is that it turns out that Spock is essentially the same. And that's kind of what the beginning of this is kind of trying to set up, is that these people are always essentially the same. They may have, different wants or desires or problems or whatever in a given situation, but they are functionally the same people, no matter how this world swerves and changes. And so it is intentionally, is not just through the time loops, but also by repeating behaviors, establishing who these people are, so that you have a sort of understanding of how these pieces interlock.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to go ahead and jump in again. So quick reminder, CT, since how long has it been since you've watched this series? When you rewatched the series for the podcast, like how long ago had you?
I'm going to assume the first time I probably watched through it was 2013 or 2014.
And you haven't revisited it since?
I hadn't, not until we were technically around that time, within a couple years, I had tried to get some friends and others into it, like I said, and we kept getting to about the halfway point and then stopped, so I didn't get full rewatches. So I think I'd watched all of it once and then the first half of it twice more.
Okay.
And then all of it again when we were originally scheduled to do this. So it's been a number of months since I did that rewatch.
All right, no worries. So, all right, my question for all of you, and I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start with CT and just kind of work my way down. In the latter half of the series, when we are getting through the part where Okabe is undoing all the text messages that he sent to the back, that they sent to the past, in order to get back to the original world line that they were on. With those different text messages being sent back, I personally, when I was rewatching the series, I had kind of forgotten about some of this part. I knew that it was happening, but I couldn't. I remembered it happening, but I couldn't remember specifics until I watched it again. Um, did you have? We've been talking about like the unexpected feels that this
Mm.
series can deliver on, and so again I'm going to ask this to all of you, but starting with CT, did you have a particular one of these text messages that you kind of got gut punched by? Was there anything that you were remembering from like a previous watch through that you were like, okay, yeah, this one is extra tough to sit through, or were they all just kind of similar in their impact? Oh,
Uh, yeah, that's hard. I like rewatching a series like this because, yeah, certainly, like Brian said before, or others, Brittany mentioned, it's definitely rewarding rewatches in the future because now that you either remember or know more going in, you're busy watching all of the setup steps that will get tracked out, and you're busy trying to figure out, okay, were these set up properly, or were they just kind of jankily stacked on top of each other, and they sort of blunt force went through them. So I don't recall anything from the removals that really hit me hard. I think it's one of those things where right at the real gut punch moment, of course, is exactly in the halfway point when Mayuri is killed. Everything, that is when the shit officially hits the fan. And of course, after that, we know that he's able to try to undo this, but the following episodes where he keeps failing to save her, that's really where I think everything is sitting with the biggest pit in it, is the inflection point that the series pulls there. So less when they're undoing everything later on, and more just right around where the series turns the corner, and the sense of futility and fatality that was set up there.
okay, yeah, that makes sense.
I suspect that just because I knew everything that was going to happen on a rewatch, it's hard for me to get particularly invested. I'm kind of waiting for everything to pull back around and cinch things up in a nice bow, because I'm waiting for the conclusion more than I'm writing each of those individual, how did these characters get affected? What did this take back do to the world that hits me in the feels? So in that case, I don't think there was anything specific.
Okay, Bran, let me shoot it over to you. In these moments in the latter half of the series, would you agree that Mayuri's death was kind of the biggest gut punch, or did you have anything in the latter half that kind of hit you harder, or how are you feeling about those moments?
Yeah, I mostly agree. The Maori stuff was just kind of like, that was rough. Like, because I think that's also the part where you start to really sympathize with his plight of going back over and over and trying so hard and being torn apart. Like, that's really the part where he starts to kind of unravel. And so it's a particularly I don't even know if necessarily emotional because she keeps dying, because I think to some extent you can still kind of feel that he's going to find a way to save her no matter what happens. Um, but you start to feel for him in a way that you really haven't yet. Um, so I do feel like that's maybe, you know, that is definitely the biggest thing. Um, of the things that were being undone was Luca, I think, because that just, I don't know, that hit kind of rough. I was like, that's the worst. But can't put my finger on it. Exactly.
Brittany, how about you? Was there anything in the latter half of the series that kind of hit you harder, or how are you feeling about these story beats?
Well, like each of the reversals, they hurt in different ways. It's like getting shivved in different places and having knife twisties, but in I think that the worst one for me, because a lot of these are basically it's wish fulfillment for people that Okabe cares about and wants to have like live their best lives, or but it's having to like scale back and undo all those things, and then what is life taking those things away but still remembering them? And it's the is it better to have loved and lost, like loved your life and then lost that life but you remember it, or are you better off not knowing or having not done the thing? But I think that the most gut punchy moment is because so when the show starts and Kurisu gets murdered, and then that's kind of what kicks things off. I kept waiting for them to come back to that because, you get so consumed and obsessed with trying to save Mayuri that I was like, okay, eventually this is gonna come back. Like if they're actually successful with undoing things like this, with this method, then Kurisu's gonna have to die. And then what's gonna happen there is it made me start thinking like, okay, is Ocarine just gonna like sacrifice his life or find a timeline where he's kaput and then everybody else gets to live happy lives? Which I'm glad they didn't do that. It would this feels better. It's a lot more interesting that these characters get to continue on and maintain a lot of memories, and if not memories, like they don't have it's cool that later they end up going into it's not so much a special ability some people have. It's like you just need to pass over the right place, or you need to sit in this chair, and then spatially you'll start to recall those things. There's a lot of tangents. Okay, basically, so once they finally have undone all that shit, and then Okabe, is like, all right, I think I'm getting closer to, saving Mayuri, and Kurisu is helping him every time figure this shit out. And she's invested, and she, ends up believing him, sometimes not easily, which that would be an insult to her intelligence if she was just like, okay, yeah, for sure, yeah, all right. And but when he's been so consumed, when he finally realizes like, oh my god, I faced the same exact not same exact but I'm kind of facing the same trial here, just with a different person, and it's just like compounding that experience of loss and just being traumatized over and over and over again. And it's kind of like it as you're watching it, it's so good at making you feel that like that really awful fear of and helplessness of like losing someone and knowing that you're going to lose them and there's nothing that you can do. At some points in the series they do find solutions, but they do it in a way that feels earned, like satisfying. It makes sense. But yeah, I think that was the largest like gut punchy thing is, am I ultimately going like, what do you even do in that situation? I gotta pick this loved one over this loved one.
Or
Yeah.
Rintaro's choice.
yeah,
No.
it's a not just a loved one, but one you've come to love more as a result of trying to save the other, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like he doesn't realize how much he appreciates person he might have to lose as well until it becomes reality that, oh, I completely overlooked this thing. That's it's when you watch it, you feel exhausted and you feel like hopeless when that's brought to the forefront again. And it makes the stakes feel important. Like you're, yeah.
And the unconventional reversals, and sometimes it just feels like there's a bit of Deus Ex Machina, of course, because you do get Rintaro of the future, to the rescue at the very end. But prior to that, you're still pulling for the people, and they're just pulling through as they can, rather than having an exacting plan that they're going through. They're just figuring shit out and trying to take care of it as best they can to get back to the main world line and achieve Steins Gatery, breach the 1% divergence using reading Steiner. All of the
reading
terminology.
Steiner.
Reading Steiner. Yeah, I know. There's a lot of
strikes pose in closet.
I was actually thinking about those poses, and I was like, man, I feel like I
yeah.
can picture them on a screen with a text box.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
there is some mad Chunibyo going on with this man. So, LB, you also occasionally have to answer your own questions, you see. You can't just sit there in the corner making everyone else do the heavy lifting.
It's a loop.
So,
I'm guiding the discourse.
I see. But, the same kind of question. When was the first time you watched it? How often had you prior to this most recent rewatch? And how did that sort of affect, front half, back half, and...
Yeah. So, alright, my experience with Steins Gate is actually pretty straightforward. I sailed the high seas when it first came out, because this was a period of time when I was downloading everything and anything, because I had high-speed internet and I was loving every moment of it.
yo.
So I actually did download the first 4 episodes of this series and watched it fan subbed. I found that the technical jargon that they were throwing around in the beginning episodes were really difficult for me to follow in Japanese. So I dropped it. I wasn't getting into it, so I didn't watch it and I didn't think about it again. And then a few years later, I was doing one of my iterations of the Expanding Horizons podcast, and someone recommended this show to me. So I went ahead. That's when I watched it all the way through. I watched it dubbed, and that made it a lot easier to follow.
The dub's very good as well.
Yes, and really enjoyed it. Really appreciated what I saw. Gave it a high rating. I was planning to rewatch it again a couple of years later, but I didn't get around to it. And so, yeah, so it's been a good 5 years at least since I've watched the series from beginning to end. In terms of what I remembered before, and as opposed to what what was coming back to me as I was rewatching it recently, I remembered a lot of the main story beats, but I didn't remember a lot of details. I had completely forgotten about Mayuri being shot and killed, and and that being the major catalyst of the second half. I had forgotten about that. I remembered that something big happened, and that they were gonna have to go back and undo a whole bunch of things in order to make that happen. But I didn't remember what the catalyst was. Rewatching it this time, I have to agree with CT that that's kind of the big thing that was kind of pushing me forward. Once we got to the point where Kurisu was starting to get more involved again, and Okabe was relying on her a bit more, and their relationship started growing, that became my new hooking point of what I wanted to see more of. So yeah, but Steins Gate, I initially didn't like it when it was first released, like I said, just because I found that the story was not good to watch weekly. It was just too much to take in on a weekly basis and retain it all while reading subtitles. Um, but I will say that, yeah, I really enjoyed it when I watched it all the way through a few years ago. I really enjoyed it when I rewatched it this time. I am curious to know. So, Brittany was not aware of this when we finished the first season, and I informed her. Bran, were you familiar with the fact that Steins Gate actually has a sequel?
Uh, I was unaware that there was a sequel per se. I knew there was a ton of Steins Gate stuff.
Yeah, there is a sequel, and I'm kind of curious. Having watched first season, did you also watch the episode 25 OVA where they kind of tied up all the stories with the trip to United States?
No,
Oh,
I
you
did
missed
not know
that.
that thing. So I gotta watch that.
Okay,
Mhm.
yeah, there is an the series ends at episode 24, and then there's an episode 25 OVA. It may not be available on Hulu. You may have to seek it out on like Funimation or something.
Yeah, I
Or
think that's why I
Crunchyroll if
didn't
it's
watch
there.
it.
It is called egoistic poriomania, though, so got
Yes.
Yes,
that to look forward to.
perfect.
But yeah, it's an episode 25 OVA that kind of ties up loose ends a little bit. Um having but even okay, so this may change my question just slightly, but having seen episode 24, having to see the way the series originally ended, are you interested in watching the sequel, or do you feel like the Steins Gate ended in a satisfactory enough way that you don't want to risk going further?
Well, I have to say that
Having
like
keeping in mind that you have no idea what the sequel is about or anything like that. I realize
right.
that, but
Huh.
the idea of a sequel, how is that? How is that reaching you?
I mean, I my first reaction was like, hell yeah, I'm down for that. And then I was reflecting on it, I was like, but why? Because like I feel like this ended really well. And I can't conceptualize what the hell a sequel would be,
Hmm.
or them doing a good enough job to like feel like it's of a piece with this. And I think it's because jumping into it feels like the most Steins Gate thing I can do. Like, you know what? Sure, let's friggin' go and see what the hell happens. Let's roll these dice, you know?
Uh-huh. Brittany, same thing to you. How are you feeling about the idea of a sequel? And you have the benefit of you did watch the episode 25 OVA that kind of tied up the loose ends. Having seen that, how do you feel about them releasing a sequel? Is there any interest in your brain in checking it out at some point? Not necessarily for this podcast, but just in general.
Well, it's really hard. It's really hard to say. So we had the complete story, but this is all based on a visual novel. And so I
Uh-huh.
feel like I have questions about that. Are there characters that we just didn't even see or get to meet in the show?
Uh,
And
yeah, I'm not sure actually.
but like they're the like it was a good story, and oh my god, it was a good story, and
Me like.
me like this.
Ebert and Roper.
Shit. It was it I know there's some Deus Ex Machina stuff going on. Honestly, I had that feeling things were gonna eventually work out, but like it still made you like it still felt like it was a slog for some of the characters. Some things were very, very fortuitous in the end. But, overall, as a whole, it's not easy. It's not easy to tell a compelling story from beginning to end. I feel like, but that's what kind of made me nervous about watching the OVA afterwards, because the conflict is pretty much taken care of. And I think that what we're left with is only strengthened by whatever exists in our imagination of how these people continue living their lives. But not necessarily, because there could still be other stories to tell. Part of this story was about preventing... Sorry, one second.
I'll edit this out, no worries. We still have lots of time left.
Sorry, I just got offered birthday cake.
Oh, well then.
That's legit.
I sent it back. Okay.
Go ahead.
What the hell was I saying? Frick. Oh, yeah, okay. I was a little bit apprehensive about watching the OVA afterwards, because it felt good enough on its own, and I feel like most of the time trying to go back and add more, it's either not the same, team is different, or it's like years later. And I think you said like it was like 6 or more years had passed between the first season being released and then second season.
Yeah, at least.
Like, there could be more compelling stories to tell in that world, or with the same technology but with different characters. I think it just comes down to how good of a job they could do telling another story. But if that makes sense. But the OVA was good, though. It just felt like aftercare after watching everyone die over and over. They're just in the Southwest U.S. Like, that's where I'm from, and they got the light perfect. That's something I really liked about that episode. Because you have air pollution, and you have these big mountains, just giant desert, and the light's really pretty. And I liked watching them just like fuck around at an event and be dumb. And the conflict there is just like, okay, Okabe and Kurisu are awkward asses. And they could be so happy together, but they're just awkward as hell. So let them figure that out. And so that was nice. It's kind of a send off the characters and show you the face of Suzuha's mom, who's going to party in Vegas. Figure that one out. And but I would be like a little bit scared to try watching a second one, because I don't know if it could. I feel like it's more likely that it would not improve on the original story that I watched, at least in my head. But I would be willing to watch it just to see what it's like, to see what happened, or if they build on that story in an interesting way. Because you've still got CERN, you've still got those files about people turning into Jello, which I thought would come into play a lot more. That we were going to see someone turn into Jello. We got Gel Nanas, but no Gel Peoples.
Yeah.
They were implied.
Yeah, and CERN just kind of, went away, which is a little weird.
Yeah.
Just stopped being a problem. See, that was a little confusing to me, too. Like, Moeka was acting as an agent on someone else's orders. But then, in the end, is just like, no, it's fine, whatever. That was a little bit strange.
Oh, she was hung out to dry at that point, so...
Yeah.
So before we get into, like, overall opinions, I want to go ahead, I want to take a couple of moments for everyone to be able to not necessarily talk about the story some more, but I'm kind of curious. Steins Gate is more than just its story. It's actually a really good overall package. I think that the animation is good for the series. I think that the background music is good. The theme songs are really fun to listen to. Hacking to the Gate is a bop.
Stuck in my head every day since we started watching it. I'm not kidding.
So, but I'm kind of curious. I will chime in at the end. CT, let's go ahead. Let's start with you. Did you have any aspects of this series besides the story that you particularly enjoyed? Was there? I know you like to pay attention to the crew. Was there anyone on the crew that you would single out as particularly memorable for you, besides the lead actor, which we've talked about?
Miata. Not specifically in this case. I mean, it's largely just me enjoying the characters as an overall cast and how they crisscross. In this case, the plot itself is doing all of the heavy lifting. So while I'm enjoying a lot of the ins and outs, most of the hook comes down to that. I think if I were to take, an odd episode out of it that I thought went across well was, in this case, when removing Ruka's D-mail by the end, and it's just kind of a going out on a date on the town with Rentaro episode.
Yeah.
And the interaction between the two of them was great, because you felt there was established history in the beginning, but you didn't feel a whole lot at that point. But, later on, I forget which episode that is, but it's, like 19 or in that area. So it turns into you're kind of getting a look at the sort of friendship that they would have had, or possibility of relationship they would have had if things were different prior to all of the insanity going on in the series. So we sort of get back-ended the character relationship front end there, and I like that as the character moments between the two of them, but the gang in general. I'm not sure if there is anything else in particular. I usually look at the composers, of course, and the directors. In this case, the anime had multiple directors and multiple folks on music, because, of course, they had the video game side of it, and I suspect one of the others who was doing the refining for the anime and adding certain things, but you had a lot of it that was driven by Takeshi Abo, who was doing an awful lot of, the Magic Ink and the Nitro Plus, all of the science adventure stuff in general. So I think it would have hit with me if I watched more of the shows or played more of the visual novels
That's
in
fair.
general. I can't trace that through anime, which of course is my larger hook.
Yeah.
So nothing too much in particular. It's just really enjoying it as a package whole and picking out some of the some of the best character moments, of course, are just the most dramatic moments that you're going to get, whether it's set up by the plot or set up as, they believe they're going to be parting forever and someone's about to die, that kind of thing. You get some nice smaller moments, even with crazy ass Ocarin at the end. Which is a nice way to sort of soften into the ultimate resolution. But this really is one of those things where it's how everything is wrapped together in this puzzle box that makes it what it is.
That's fair. Bran, over to you. Did you have a favorite episode? Did anything in particular about the production stand out to you in a memorable way?
Doo-doo-doo.
Mm.
I loved Mayuri. That she was great. I can see where she would be really grating, but for some reason I was just like, "Aw, you
I
are
know.
so clueless."
But also
just-
wise. It's like high wisdom, maybe
She-
lower intelligence, which is just because she gives everyone the benefit of the doubt.
She believes in everybody, you know.
Yes.
Like she just fundamentally believes in everybody and really cares about them.
Yes.
And that gets her through basically everything, right? Like every insight she has is because she cares about how people feel, and she's just great. But other than that, for the most part, I
also because she really wanted a metal Upa, and that solved everything.
Oh, what if behind the scenes she was like, "Oh, these people could go to hell. I just need my Upas."
Yeah.
If she wasn't a huge Upa fanatic.
It turns out she's the mastermind behind it all.
Oh my god.
But yeah, I agree. Aside from that, with CT, I mean, for me, like I always love the plot puzzly bit of these kinds of stories. So it really is a lot of the story and details and fitting it all together and like going over it in my brain is actually what I really love about this kind of stuff. So it's great for that, and that is really what I loved. But Mayuri is awesome.
Brittany, how about you? Did you have a favorite episode, favorite aspect?
Favorite? I don't know, but well, I like that this is a story that sets up circumstances wherein it makes sense to do like character studies. Or I mean, it's probably not the right word, but words. But it's like you get to kind of enter a few, like when things are getting undone, you get to enter people's lives, and it's, Okabe trying to understand what's going on and get them on board with we gotta change this, but it's kind of like you're exposed to microcosms of all these different characters' hopes and dreams and suffering and psychology, but also like the interpersonal relationships between them too. And it's insane to like watch how that builds and what that means between different world lines. But on a more aesthetic level, I really liked everyone's designs because I feel like they all had something. The way that people were dressed or certain accessories that they had made it really easy to early on connect. Okay, that because at one point when I started watching it, I was like, I've been introduced to a whole bunch of characters. Now what? But there are traits of characters that pair really well with how they're presented visually. Like Mayuri is in light teal sundress with a sun hat. It's like kind of whimsical, chill, and I don't know. I just always have that image of like, oh, Mayuri falling in front of a train, or after getting shot, and her hat just falls off tragically. And then and then Kurisu has lab coat, and but it's and then Suzuha has that hairstyle that everyone had. Every third most relevant character in animes released.
Gotta have your tight braids.
Early 2000s, late 90s. But we see it there. I don't know, maybe because she's a time traveler. Maybe that's the hint.
High 2036 fashion is what we're talking about.
Yep. We don't even know what's cycling through at that point. There are a lot of things to appreciate about the show.
Okay.
And my experience of feeling irritated when I first started watching it, but then everything growing on me. I liked it because it's kind of how things unfold in the show itself. It's how some of the characters figure out, they have to get used to each other first before they can start working together and accomplish things and understand each other. Yeah.
Right on. So Brittany just kind of shared she segued into her overall opinion. What was your overall takeaway from this series? Good experience? Did you enjoy it? Would you watch it again?
Yes to all of that. I very much enjoyed it. It is a punishing show at times where you're just like, damn, you're going to be doing this to me? And I don't generally have a high threshold for that kind of stuff. I'm just like, it's good to watch that kind of stuff once, but if I'm going to rewatch something, I want to watch something fun, But I think this one I could potentially come back to because, again, I do enjoy these kind of time loopy things, and the rewatch aspect of it is always interesting. So yeah, I probably will rewatch it at some point just to be like, oh, what was this, and relive the time loop.
Right on. So did anybody have any closing thoughts? Anything that CT, do you have anything that you want to bring up before we wrap things up?
Well, I guess more of a question for you at this point.
Okay.
I know you have a tendency to rewatch things fairly often that you particularly like. So in the case of Steins Gate, it's, as you said, it's been a number of years and you probably hadn't rewatched it all that many times in general. Is this something, your overall appreciation of the series, or is it more reflective of just how much attention you have to give it, as it were, in that it's meaty, so it's not necessarily a comfort food kind of thing? Do you just have to be in a particular mood, or like me, is it where you more often want to be able to share it with someone? Or
this is a show that I would enjoy rewatching. Like I said before, when the sequel got announced, I wanted to rewatch it. I just never got a chance. And so I ended up missing out on the sequel, and that's fine. Maybe someday I'll go back to it. Someday maybe I won't. Who knows? Um, the problem with Steins Gate is, like you mentioned, it is a very meaty series. There's a lot of fine details that you have to pay attention to the first couple of times you watch it, or you're going to get lost. This isn't a series that I can just throw on in the background on my tablet while I'm doing other things. Um, if I rewatch this series, it's something I want to pay attention to it. I want to take in those fine details. Um, so I don't know if this is going to ever join my regular rotation of series that I rewatch while I'm working or just gaming or whatever. Um, it's not a series that I'm against rewatching. But I think this is another case. This is one of those cases where, unless I'm showing it to someone, I doubt that I'm gonna watch it on my own just for fun.
Gotcha. But you don't have you don't have any rebellion-like reservations about watching any of the further media or Steins Gate Zero?
I have reservations. I'm not against it. I would, like I mentioned, watch the sequel. I think that I'm curious to see where it goes. I make no promises that I would complete the sequel. If it goes places that I don't like, I may back out of it and see what and kind of get night and then go back once I've had an idea of, get an idea of where it's gonna go, what the overall consensus is on the quality of the story. um I like referring to that every so often, just to kind of make sure I get an idea of what I'm getting into.
Yeah, the funny thing for me is I'm sort of metagaming that, in that I know that the game, because Steins Gate Zero was itself a visual novel before it
Yeah.
became an anime as well, so knowing that it's not everyone who is involved in the original game, it's got a bunch of directors on it. Not the director of the original one. Nitro Plus, I don't believe was involved, whereas this was a Magic Inc. or 5PB and Nitro Plus joint endeavor for the first one. So I I have fewer about the I don't want to touch the perfection of it reason why I won't watch Rebellion or anything further from Madoka Magica. But because, this one is just all about alternate timelines and everything else, so I feel like it's more interesting to take a peek at all of the world lines. So I'm not as averse to it, but I am metagaming it a bit. So there are concerns.
The
funny thing is, I don't recall hearing a whole lot of people's opinions about it either, one way or the other. I feel like for Madoka Magica, it was much more of a, you knew some people really loved Rebellion or really hated Rebellion, and I don't. As prominent as Steins Gate appreciation is, you hear almost nothing about Zero. So, not sure how to interpret that.
Bran, you wanted to interject?
Yeah, I was just on the topic of metagaming. Actually, ironically, I probably will not rewatch this for quite some time because I'm more likely to be like, you know what? I should play the game.
Yep.
And that'll probably be my rewatch, so to speak.
So, does anybody have any closing thoughts, comments that they want to throw in before we wrap things up?
I appreciated that by the end of the show, the Deus Ex Ho in Kioma, where he's talking to himself from the future, turned around. And I like that ultimately, like, it's a show that makes you feel, it has a lot of dark, but also light. And it complements and contrasts in ways that are fun. And also not fun. But I like that overall, it ends up having this message or this resolution of your experiences and your suffering have meaning. Even if these are experiences or things that you've learned on your own and they're not really things you can share with others, because it might not make sense to some of them, or they might be like, I mean, as I'm not a time traveler, I can't really relate.
That's exactly what a time traveler trying to stay hidden would say.
I know. I won't even try to, make a case that I am not. Whoops.
What Steiners do you possess?
Steiner math, man.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that's really powerful, and it's a good thing to walk away with after watching a series that had a lot to it. Like, it takes you through a spectrum of emotions and settings and moments, because it is kind of a gut punch when, like, Mayuri is first killed, because yeah, you might be waiting for the other shoe to drop, but it just has all these lighthearted moments, and it takes the most lighthearted character and just boom, goodbye.
Well, that's kind of how it makes, I feel, the that whole Deus
demands your Sorry, continue.
Yeah, I was, because you'd mentioned the Deus Ex Machina point at the end, and for me, a lot of times that is something that'll take me out of it and be like, well, I was really enjoying this, but you just pulled you top deck the ace of spades just to make things work at the end. And in a way, that is what it reflects, because only future Rintaro is able to save Kurisu, but the only way he gets summoned is by Mayuri being there and able to inspire him to not give up after he had the whole, everyone thinks you have failure from the penultimate episode, and then she gets to push him on. So, being with her, saving her at the end, allows her to keep him on track, which I feel like it's Mayuri who summons super mode.
Yeah, and it's like,
from the future to be able to do that last mile right at the end where all of the things finally sync together, and it's like, oh no, all of that stuff, yes, did happen, but no, it wasn't what you thought it was, and makes it all sync together pretty tightly, and in language you used before, it's earned in this case.
It's satisfying to watch, because most things that are a lot of good outcomes don't necessarily just happen. They require work and toil, and maybe you go a little bit crazy, but
so in the end, this was just one big shonen battle series. You just don't give up until the end, and then you win.
Zankoku wa Tenshi no Yoho ni Shonen Yoshibaname. Basically.
With the power
I'm sorry.
of friendship.
With the power of Crunchyroll, I endow you.
So, alright, let's go ahead. Let's wrap things up on that note. Thank you, CT, Brandon, Brittany, for joining me for another fun discussion. It was a blast.
Thank you, everybody.
Good time?
Was good times, yes.
And thank you to all of you for listening to us talk for the last hour and a half. We appreciate it greatly. If you want to go ahead and hit that like, share, and subscribe button, it would help us out a ton. And we hope that you will join us again for the next time we do this, which will be in 3 months. It will be in June. CT and I haven't decided which series we're going to be discussing next time, but pay attention to our social media feeds on either Twitter or Mastodon at Otaku Review for news and announcements. So otherwise, have a good night, everybody.
Night, folks.
Peace.